But I'd like to provide you with a little bit of background for Dr. Kenny. Dr. Kenny received her bachelor's degree from University of Northern Colorado, her master's in education from Boston University in education, and then another master's degree from Vanderbilt, and then a PhD from UMass Amherst, which I had formerly been there as ADR. So we have a lot of crossovers in our past. She's currently, she also holds a master's in bioethics at Loyola University. And I was delighted when I was reviewing her CV to also learn, because I'm a wound healing researcher, that she had received the Phyllis Veronic Award. And I say that because Phyllis Veronic was a sort of a pioneer in wound research. And because that's my area of research, she studied decubitus ulcers. And actually, when she was at University of Virginia, used worked with some biomedical engineers to use thermography, which is a heat sensing type of thermal detection, to look at healing of these wounds. So I was really delighted to see that she had received this award, just because it crossed over again with my own research in wound healing. Dr. Kenny also has some wonderful publications, and after the talk, you might want to go read some of these. And I'd like to just briefly mention some of these. She published in the Online Journal of Issues in Nursing a manuscript on heavy burdens, ethical issues faced by military nurses during a war, everyday heroes, nurses working quietly behind the scenes, saving lives and protecting their patients, which appeared in the Journal of Health and Human Experience. But she also wrote an article that appeared in the Journal of Trauma Nursing on mass casualty care in an expeditionary environment, developing local knowledge and expertise and context. And another article which appeared in Critical Care Nursing Clinics of North America on critical care nurses' experiences caring for the casualties of war evacuated from the front line. So she brings with us a background as having served in the U.S. Army Nurse Corps and has had experience in these situations. And so we are so thankful to bring her voice with us today to talk about what is our responsibility as healthcare providers when we might be in these situations, whether they are situations where we don't expect to find ourselves, or sometimes not so far off when we find ourselves in these situations during natural disasters of hurricanes and tornadoes and other life-threatening events as well. So with that, I'm going to welcome Dr. Kenny to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wysocki. I appreciate it. So I'm going to share my screen here, and I'm going to put it on slideshow so I can. All right, can you see my slides?
Yes.
Oh, excellent. Okay, so I was really honored to be able to be invited and to provide some information about the Geneva Conventions and rules of engagement during war, as I know it from my time in the military. I'm not an expert on war crimes. That's a whole other law degree that I don't have, but I am familiar with the basic rules. First off, you always have to disclose in conflicts of interest, and I have none. And I just want you to know that the opinions contained in this talk are mine and mine alone, and don't represent the U.S. government, University of Colorado, Anschutz Medical Campus. So some more disclosure. I come from a family who served during every U.S. war period since the Revolutionary War. I had relatives who came over on the Mayflower, and they've been here since the very beginning. I did spend 24 years as an Army nurse, and I served during both Vietnam and Iraq and Afghanistan, but I never got to deploy. I had a big break in there, so it's just, it was disappointing in my career, but that's the way it was, because I was on the receiving end of casualties at Walter Reed during the beginning of Iraq and Afghanistan. And yes, I have been down upon by my own brother because of my service, but I still love and respect him. He just has different views, and that is okay. And that's what I want to convey to you all today. This is a picture of a Geneva Convention card, something we were all issued in the military. I, believe it or not, still have mine. And let's just kind of dive right in. I do want to provide a trigger warning because I'm going to be providing some stark statistics here and talking about some things that I know that many people have strong feelings about. And I just want to iterate that is okay because I have them too. But what I'd like to do is try to clarify how you might handle these situations here or figure out how to begin to reconcile some of them within yourself. I will not take a stance on one side or the other. And I hope to open lines of communication with honest and civil discourse. The only rule of engagement here is if you have feelings, go ahead and speak them, but be sure to listen to others' feelings too, because everybody's feelings have individual value. So some sobering statistics here. And I went back and I just kind of Googled, war since the beginning. And I'm looking at this and going, these are a lot of casualties for pre BC, during BC to 1500 AD. And I'd like to highlight the Three Kingdoms War and the Mongol invasions here. At the time, the estimated population of the world was 350 million. So in the Three Kingdoms War, that wiped out about 10% of the population, and the Mongol invasions, another 10%, which is pretty amazing. And these are, if you put it into context in today, a similar death toll would be about 1 billion people. So, moving forward to the Spanish conquest and the French War, Napoleonic Wars, the Taiping rebellions. By 1800, the world population was estimated to be about 1 billion. By 1938, 2 billion. The fact of the matter is, even though I'm talking about all of these people who died, my feeling is that even one death is one too many. And let's just moving closer to home, the Civil War, of course, 620,000, World War II, 20 million, 116,000 US citizens, and this does not include the Spanish flu pandemic. And you look at World War II, it was even more so. And so then you look on the wars on terror for the last 20 years or till 2021. There was 4.5 million deaths and about 7,000 US citizens. I don't know how many of you have been to Arlington Cemetery. This is Arlington. I attend a conference every year in Washington, and I make it a point to go over there. And it's not because I have some crazy need to visit a cemetery, because I don't, but rather out of overwhelming respect for those who are buried there. It's quite humbling just to see how many men and women over the acres and acres of property there have sacrificed their all for this country. And I find this profoundly sacred ground. All right, let's go to the next. Okay, so why do we need rules of engagement? Well, these are to protect non-combatants. And by non-combatants, I mean anybody who is not supposed to be fighting. This is primarily women and children, but others as well, such as healthcare and humanitarian aid workers. And a lot of these rules of engagement came about because of the abuses that we saw during World War II with the Germans and with the Japanese that we perpetrated on them. So we needed to be able to lay out who should be protected in wartime. Just a little brief history of the Geneva Conventions. These are the conventions, and there's 4 of them, and that's why I use the plural. And their additional protocols are international treaties that contain the rules, most important rules, treating the barbarity of war. It's important to note that while they were adopted and signed into in 1949, there are many laws on the books that covered some of these conventions from as far back as 1864. For example, The sick and wounded were recognized as needing protection. And then the second convention replaced, and I will go through them here in a minute, replaced the Hague Convention of 1907. And the third convention updated the Prisoners of War Convention of 1929. So you can see that it kind of has a long history. Have they worked? Well, my feeling on that is they work if we pay attention to them. They don't work if we don't pay attention to them. Okay, so these are the Geneva Conventions and their additional protocols. The first one protects wounded and sick soldiers on land during war. The second protects wounded and sick and shipwrecked military personnel at sea during war. The third protects prisoners of war, and the fourth protects civilians, including those in occupied territory. And then the additional protocols that were signed on in 1977 and 2005 protect victims of international, non-international, and those with the distinctive emblems such as the Red Cross, the Red Crescent, and the Red Crystal. So in the military, all hospitals have the Red Cross on them, and we are supposed to be treated as non-combatants. Did we get shelled over in Iraq and Afghanistan? Yes, we did. Did we as nurses carry sidearms? Yes, we did. I carried a 9mm whenever we were out in the field doing war games. Who signed on to abide by the Geneva Conventions? Well, right now we've got 196 states, and you can read that as countries, including all UN member states, UN observers, including the Holy See in Palestine. This also includes the US, Russia, China, Israel, Palestine again, Yemen, Sudan, and the Ukraine. So all of these people signed on to these in 1949. So, and then here's a couple of other resources for you for humanitarian and international law. You can read everything that's in the Geneva Conventions in the website, the International Community of the Red Cross. And I've put the website here for you so you can just go take a look. It's kind of fun to just kind of tool around in these places and see what everybody's doing. UN included but not limited to international peace and security, protecting human rights, delivering humanitarian aid, promoting sustainability, and upholding international law. So, you know, it's fascinating to read about these. But what I knew with my experience in the military was that we were protected unless we started fighting, or unless we were housing military commanders who were non-combatants. So does that mean there's no more abuses? Absolutely not. There continues to be disregard or abuse to the rules. And the recent examples are Vietnam. In My Lai, there were 350 to 500, and the US did this. Killed, raped, and mutilated at My Lai. And there's been lots and lots of talk about that. The African genocides, of course, going on. And Iraq and Afghanistan, the attack on Haditha, and we're going to talk about that in just a little bit. The attacks on hospital compounds that the Iraqis and the Afghanis did. Haditha was US. The Russia and Ukraine, of course, use of civilian non-combatants as human shields. And then Israel and Hamas, the attacks on the Palestinian hospitals. My question here to you, though, is, but are these in violation of international humanitarian law? We'll talk about that. So imagine yourself for a moment. You're the commander of a small unit on patrol. A few minutes ago, an IED exploded, killing one of your men. You are following that vehicle that in which there were people killed, and you see a group of men standing around a vehicle on the side of the road. You only have a split second to make a decision. What do you do? So this is a question that if anybody would like to answer, they can. We'll take just a moment. Okay, let me tell you what really happened. The commander saw the men as a threat and fired, killing them, four unarmed college students, and a taxi driver, and then proceeded to go into the civilian houses in the area, killing more civilians. The case has been analyzed over and over again, and the conclusion was that the commander in this case had engaged in a manner called the recognition primed decision model, and that these events were what he had trained for. Did it excuse his actions? I don't know. Looking at it from an ethical stance, one could say he had a duty to protect his squad, but he also had a duty not to kill innocent civilians. So in today's urban environments, this is not always as straightforward as you would think. And you can see how very complex this can be. So I'm just going to throw some things out here for you because I think it's important to start to see how complex it is. Hamas, which governs Palestinian territory, must adhere to the Geneva Conventions. They've shown no intention to relent their attacks. Israel has not ratified the first and second additional protocols, but they are binding. Self-defense must be proportionate to the threat, and total destruction of Hamas would cause and is causing disproportionate harm to civilians. Collateral damage to civilians can be legal if it achieves a military purpose, but it should be minimized and based on current intelligence. If you think back to this story that I gave you about the commander, his intelligence was that there was an IED that exploded right next to his vehicle. His vehicle was okay, but he got out and he saw these guys. He didn't know whether this white car they were standing by was a roadside bomb or if they were armed. And that was his intelligence, and that's what he was trained to act upon. So was it current? Well, it was as current as it can get. Civilian buildings are not unconditionally protected. And let me explain that. So our hospitals and our buildings are protected, but if they are operated and by enemy forces, which some of the hospitals in Palestine had Hamas militants operating underneath them, then they're not unconditionally protected. And I'm not even going to surmise as to whether or not Israel did the right thing by bombing, and I will just say bombing the heck out of them. So let's just talk about complexity some more. Was the Hamas attack on Israel a war crime? Well, yes, it was, because it was indiscriminate and not aimed toward military targets, and hostages were taken. Are Israel's attacks on Gaza hospitals war crimes? Yes and no. The UN states it's collective punishment and forcible evacuation. So they're saying it is a war crime. However, the use of hospitals as military command and control centers by Hamas causes hospitals to lose protected status, and thus attacking them is not per se a war crime. But questions must be asked about Israel's definition of military targets. And we should be talking about proportionality, i.e., they've revised the estimates yesterday down to 1,150 Israelis killed, but over 29,000 Palestinians killed. And then you've got to consider on top of that the humanitarian issues that are happening with the aid not being able to get in. So is it proportional? I would say absolutely not. Is it wrong? You know, I am going to take a stand here and say, yes, it is. But that's really kind of up to the UN, and they're the ones that are going to have to hold Israel accountable. What I'd like to do, and because I've been talking horrible things for a few minutes now. And so what I'd like to do is to change tack a little bit here. And I show the sailboat, and I don't mean any pun because it's a legitimate sailing term. But I'm going to go to something of a more positive note because as I understand, most of you are nursing students and nursing faculty, and I emphasize the word nursing. So between 2004 and 2012, and this is where some of those articles that Dr. Wasaki mentioned have come. And we conducted a study, and we started out to find out how nurses acquired clinical knowledge during war, and any humanitarian efforts, because we had OBGYN nurses who were thrown over in Iraq and Afghanistan and working in the ERs or working in the trauma units. And they had no clue what they were supposed to be doing. But what we did was we started interviewing nurses. And I have to say that Patricia Benner was a consultant on this study. And let me go back a little bit here. And she just doesn't quit. So we ended up interviewing 235 nurses and 67 injured service members. And I say that when you interview nurses, you got to be careful because you will get an earful. And we learned so much more about wartime and care. We learned ethical, moral issues. We learned about vulnerability. We're currently writing a paper about the leadership. And so we have such a gold mine of data here that we have to get out there, out into the public, because we, one, owe it to our participants, and two, we owe it to the profession. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about a story. And I'm going to read to you and it's rather long, but I'm going to anyways, because it's very, very poignant. I'm going to read to you what one nurse told us as she was caring for our military over in Afghanistan. And my first experience with a Taliban soldier from Taliban bad guys, they call them, I was given a black eye and a broken bone in my face from an attack from him. And so that was not something I'd been familiar with as a nurse, as for many years as I have been. Quite alarming. I didn't hit him back, but I continued to take care of him for the whole 10 days he was there. And it was a good thing. It reminded me of the oath I took as a nurse to take care of any patient, anywhere, anytime that I was needed to. And it was a challenge because this particular one was just a boy, and he actually killed 2 of our American soldiers. So it was every bit of strength that I had to take care of him. Being a pediatric nurse, though, I could do it because I focused on the fact that he was a young patient, a young boy, and that was all he knew. So I gave him 100% of care, and I feel very good about that. He taught me a valuable lesson about giving care to someone you didn't want to, and it did make me grow. And who says you can't still learn as an old nurse? And she's laughing here. He had, unfortunately, because he was so young, he had set an IED to explode. And instead of, well, it did explode and it killed 2 of our young soldiers, but it also injured him because he didn't get away. He lost a leg, an arm, he was trached, and he lost an eye. So the joke downrange was that I had half of a young boy attack me and couldn't defend myself. But as I said, it did teach me a valuable lesson. And I think the junior officers saw how I handled the situation and that I was willing to take care of him, even though he broke a bone in my face. I was still going to give him the best care, and I wasn't going to back down. I was going to show him he didn't scare me and that I was going to be a nurse and still going to be an American. Yes, it actually did. When he left, and whenever you take care of a Taliban, I don't know if you ladies, anybody here has, but if they're a detainee, you simply finish taking care of them till they can care for themselves the best way, and then you have to leave them. So you take them to the outskirts where it's safe for you and leave them, and they have to get to where they can for safety. So we simply took this young man to the outside quarters of the airfield. And of course, he's blindfolded and has earmuffs, has no idea where we brought him from. It's for our safety, of course, and we drop him. And so he has to manage to get to safety himself. But knowing that and how young he was, I know he was probably very strong, but I left him with a sack of water, food, and his bracelet that's for good luck. It's a religious bracelet that was taken off him when he first came to our hospital. I gave it back to him and said goodbye. And he thanked me in English. He said, "Thank you, Commander." And the only reason he knew my rank was because the gentleman that rescued me, the MP, um, that rescued me from when he hit me, said, "Commander, are you okay?" And he remembered that. Our name tags are covered. Otherwise, he didn't know my name, but he did know some English and he did understand. So I said to him, Tashakor, which is thank you in Afghani. He looked very puzzled at me, and I told him, "You taught me a valuable lesson." Even though I don't think he understood me, I think he did because he saw my eyes. And I did become attached to him, even though he hurt me. But if he made it back, he might say, "They're not as bad as you think." And they gave me very good care. So after she finished describing this young boy, we all had the Kleenex boxes out, all of us. But she cared for him as if all human life mattered. She chose not to take sides. And I have to say that of 235 nurses that we interviewed, without exception, they all said in these situations, the nurse in me came out, and I had to recognize that the person in front of me was a human being, and I had to care for him the best I could, or him or her the best I could. And I will tell you that that moment made me extremely proud to be a nurse and an American. We just heard that over and over and over again throughout all these interviews, and it made me proud. So, what can you do? I do want to say it's okay to have feelings one way or the other. Um, these are very controversial topics, and war is never easy. It's always complex, and like I said, even one life lost is one life too many. But know, whatever your feelings are, that there will be opposing viewpoints, and all of them are valid from the viewer's point of view.